McClean, I am happy, and we can continue on this because what I want to talk about really and truly relates to all that you've been sharing. Because as we look to make these transformations, we have to understand that there are implications for our society and for whether it's social and economic issues. And I think you touched on some of those. But before I even talk about that, I want to say something about how this announcement was made. Because as I
Thank you.
listened to you, Glenn, I recalled, and I don't think the process has changed, the format of these meetings. And usually what happens at a heads meeting, you have three categories of heads who normally speak in that opening ceremony and generally have an opportunity to make any announcements, etc. You have the outgoing chair, you have any new prime ministers or presidents who would have come into office between the last meeting and
Right.
that meeting. And then you have the incoming chair. The outgoing chair was Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, who is never short of words. And therefore, I would have expected her to
Right.
tell anybody, to tell the world, even if she told us when she was telling the world about her decision. And so it is, to use an expression I like to hear, is passing strange that this would have been delegated to the Prime Minister of Jamaica. That's one of the things that I want to say. The other thing, another point that I want to raise is procedurally what happens. And I printed out an article, and I'll read from it because I'm not sure if they've got it, and they may not have had a chance. I was looking when I realized what we were discussing. I said, let me go back and see if I can find some information. And there's an article by the International Organization for Migration, an opinion column by somebody called Patrice Quesada, coordinator for the Caribbean International Organization for Migration. And this article, and Dave, later on, if people want to see that, I didn't make it up, because politicians sometimes go into parliament with blank paper and they put up right line.
Yeah.
Reading from a document. Okay, there it is. So if you look at that, it says quickly at the beginning, it is truly an historical decision. On 4th July 2023, that's 2 years ago, because you have the February intersessional and then you have the July meeting, which is the main meeting. So this was in July, this was the second meeting in July. So you had that meeting, and then you had two in 2024, one in 2025. So, and then the July meeting. It says, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the institution, the heads of state of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, under the chairmanship of Dominica's Honorable Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, announced a big step towards regional integration. And the article goes on to quote the Prime Minister of Barbados. In the words of Barbados' Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who holds responsibility for the CARICOM single market and economy in the CARICOM quasi-cabinet, they have responded to what every Caribbean citizen has wanted since we've had control of our destiny. This major step forward is the decision to extend freedom of movement to all CARICOM nationals. Let me stop there and say a couple of things. As the Prime Minister responsible for freedom of movement, why are you delegating or refusing to tell Barbadians that having made this decision in 2023, you have gone the full gamut to make it happen in relation to Barbados and some other states, and leave it to a head of state, as you correctly said, a prime minister, a head of government, head of state is your president or governor general, head of government, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, to make this announcement when it is about your country as one of the four. It is about you as the lead head for that area. That is strange. Now, that's one of the things. Now, this announcement would have been reported. I it also would suggest that once that decision is taken, there are processes and procedures to go through. Typically, and you hear us ratifying conventions and so on, you hear we ratify, and then it comes into force. Before something comes into force, you have to make sure that you have all kinds of systems, legal, legislation and whatever else in place. And so my question is, we've been talking about this for a long time, but what exactly do we need to put in place to make sure that this thing happens? Because if you're talking about free movement, the question is, what are the implications of that? What are the projections? I think I heard it was like you or Glenn asking about,
the implications
made. Now, and I'll share some numbers here because I'll come back to this statement. Because in fact, before I share the numbers, the paragraph goes, one of the paragraphs, because I'm not going to read the entire thing. Dave, if you can go down to the paragraph, it says, by publicly, by publicly taking the decision, this is the paragraph after the one I was reading, to sign a renewed agreement by 30th March 2024, the leaders of CARICOM have paved the way to become one of the most integrated regions in the world by allowing citizens to seek work or family reunification opportunities in other CARICOM countries. It then goes on to say the International Organization for Migration, IOM, at the request of CARICOM, is currently undertaking a study of the collection, management, and analysis of free movement data within the CSME. Activities are on the way to engage CSME focal points to address the challenges in existing processes and find opportunities to improve the system to ensure it caters to the new free movement regime. I don't know. I don't hear everything that happens in Barbados and around CARICOM, but y'all can help me. Have you heard about any outcomes of any such studies and research? I don't. It then goes,
I don't recall hearing anything.
Exactly. It then goes on to say this. The decision comes at an interesting juncture in the recent rich history of the Caribbean. From IMO's assessment of the migratory context, one important economic game changer with potential large social implications has emerged with the emerging oil and gas industry in Guyana. As per other studies of labor needs to accompany this large-scale transformation, it appears that labor migration will have to play an essential role to fuel the market with skilled and non-skilled workers in all the sectors that will be directly and indirectly affected. These would include, for instance, extraction, construction, housing, health, and education. How this massive labor need can be strategically managed to benefit the region as a whole is a defining question for the decade. Now, they were talking about Guyana, but let me say this. I had a conversation mid-last week with a former CARICOM colleague from Guyana, senior political figure, and who was also involved in the regional bodies of CARICOM. And an interesting thing is happening in Guyana, which suggests to me that some Guyanese, notwithstanding all that is happening, if they do not find opportunities in oil and gas, may find living, in other words, the cost of living in Guyana has been increasing exponentially. People who are earning in the new sector will probably be okay or do well. But persons who are outside of that sector may be having challenges, okay? And so in essence, there's an upside and a downside to the economic development. And on top of that, what was suggested to me was that there is another factor which has implications for some Guyanese workers, and that is race and ethnicity. And so what it says to me is that while this issue will become an issue in Guyana in terms of inward migration, we may still see at some point Guyanese feeling the need to leave, because if salaries and so on do not change in the traditional sectors, people are going to find it extremely difficult surviving with increasing costs. Because when I heard some of the costs of produce and so on, food, vegetables, and so on, I was shocked, because my experience of going to Guyana over the years was that it was a joy to go shopping for those things when you contrasted the price with Barbados. Now, that is an issue. Let me read this, and then I'm going to say something quickly about Jamaica in this whole scheme of things and some other countries in the Caribbean. It goes on to say, of course, the devil is in the details, and government lawyers and multiple stakeholders will need all the time that they have ahead of the March deadline, which was last year, to iron out possible issues of contention. So in essence, there may be an explanation as to why only 4 countries have agreed to participate. In terms of this article, they were speaking of Guyana and so on. Now, I want to say this. We need to remember, and I say this from my experience, in addition to free movement, we already have a regime where CARICOM citizens are entitled to an automatic 6-month stay. Okay? I remember as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade having to respond to a colleague from Jamaica who insisted that they wanted to have free movement and the CSME on every agenda of the meetings of Quartet. Now, foreign ministers go to meetings what they call COFCOR, Foreign Affairs, the Committee of Foreign and was it Relations, COFCOR, some foreign and the other one was Quartet, which related to the foreign trade aspect of it. And the person was saying, on this foreign trade, a meeting of foreign trade ministers, we want to talk about free movement. And my question was, I have no difficulty, and it was targeted at Barbados. I have no difficulty, but just tell me what you want. I didn't get an answer. I said, but I will tell you what I want and what I am prepared to give. I said, I am prepared because we need to understand, have a picture of movement. And I said, I am prepared to request of the Immigration Department in Barbados to prepare monthly reports on arrivals and departures of CARICOM citizens. So coming in, because you get reports, you get it for other nationalities, etc. Immigration in Barbados can generate for you on a monthly basis movement statistics. And I am calling on this administration in Barbados to provide us Barbadians with such statistics. Because the interesting thing was, and I'll tell you, at the end of the day, I think that Barbados was one, if not the only one of less than 4 countries that provided those statistics on a regular basis. And what was interesting for me when we looked at people who were entitled to move freely, that was a very small percentage of the total number of persons who travel in and out of Barbados. And in this case, we were focusing on CARICOM nationals. And an interesting number back in 2012, 13, 14, etc., 8, 9, 10, because I had the statistics. I still have some of them. If I check in my documents, I can find. Was the number of Jamaicans. I was surprised to see the number of Jamaicans who came in and out of Barbados. And so when we talk about free movement and Jamaica's failure to take it up in the first instance as part of that team, is that they perhaps have no interest in other words, their citizens are moving freely here already. And I was sure this was reported to me. I can say it to y'all privately because the person worked for somebody known to the 3 of us.
Okay.
And a person came into this country and was boasting of the fact that he had arrived in Barbados 6 months ago from the time he spoke to the person who talked to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was happy to report that he had received permanent residence. And he could not wait to vote for people who bear my initials.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so in essence, I as I looked at this, I said, you know what? The free movement is an issue, and for me, the big picture is, why were we told that we had gone from what was announced in 2023 and what was supposed to be a deadline in 2024 to a position where at the July meeting of heads in 2025, we would have heard not from the Prime Minister of Barbados, but from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, an announcement that did not touch Jamaica, but and he was announcing it as a new head, which means he's now coming to start work. Our Prime Minister was concluding her work as head for the 6-month period. And I will share some numbers and then say something quickly about healthcare, because one of the important things that we need to understand is that if we are going to have significant movement of people into the country, because if you're moving, in essence, what you're saying, you're probably coming to live. And when you come to live, you probably will move with your family.
Correct.
Yeah, you're not coming by yourself. If you were on a work permit, you probably will come by yourself. But if you are moving, you will look to move, even if not immediately, you're looking to move, you will come and settle and probably look for schools and accommodation, because people move not only for a job, they move in a situation where when they look at the total package, quality of life, social services, recreational facilities, etc. I mean, we hear that. Go and look at an ad for that would have been shown in our international business sector in terms of why choose Barbados. They don't just say to you, you come get good workers. They talk about life in Barbados. According to these estimates, Jamaica had around 2023 a population of 2,825,544 people. Trinidad, a population of 1,534,937. Bahamas, 412,624. Guyana, 814,000. Suriname, 623,236. Barbados, approximately 282,000. I just rounded up. St. Lucia, 180,251. Grenada, 126,000. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 103,699. Antigua, Barbuda, less than 100,000, 94,298. Dominica, 73,040. St. Kitts and Nevis, about 47,755. The point I'm making is that even when you look at the population sizes, there are huge differences. And so there are a whole set of factors. I mean, the when you look at a country like Guyana and Suriname, they have a population density of about 5 people per square kilometer. Barbados is hundreds. If it's per square mile,
Are we around 1,500 or something like that, a square mile?
Square mile, I think it is. I think ours may be a square mile. Theirs was quoted in square kilometers. And so the point I'm making is that at the end of the day, we know what the ideal is. But as the article said, the devil is in the details. The reality comes in relation to things such as the capacity. And I want to say something very quickly because I'm not sure how much time I have. You can let me know. About what is the situation of what I call the situation of the Queen Little Hospital and healthcare in Barbados. We have major problems on our hands.
Big time.
I say that without fear of contradiction. As Sharon says, sad to say, QEH done pop down. And that phrase just conjures up for me a lot of concerns. And I asked the question, what is the quality of care across medical specialties in Barbados and or areas of illness? And I use the ones with which I'm familiar or where relatives of mine have had in over the years to deal. Eye care. We continue to have a problem with, and these things were addressed and they've been allowed to slide. Eye care, I have seen the consequences of people who have glaucoma not being able to get their 6 months checkups, and all that they're getting is a prescription to get drops. Nobody is checking because of the load or whatever. Nobody was able to hear, well, your eye pressures are under control, and therefore there's no further deterioration of your condition. You're getting drops, do not guarantee stabilization. Cancer patients have to go to Trinidad. I recently, earlier this year, went into Trinidad with somebody to receive treatment, being in Trinidad for 6 weeks. And I saw, after I was preparing this an article, I don't know if Dave saw it, and I was hoping to pull it up before the program, but if I find it, I'll share it, where I think they call it a linear accelerator. It's a piece of equipment that they need that is in Barbados, but they tell me that they have not been able to set it up for use. But government is spending probably the equivalent of what it is required to set up the equipment and get it in use to send patients to Trinidad, Colombia, and wherever else.
But might be brought to bear on our healthcare system.
But you're correct. In fact, let me say something. One, and it takes us back to this whole deconstruct and reconstruct. And I am very concerned. I can tell you this, that pre-2008, a group of us sat down and we did, I can tell you, some very serious work. We had focus groups. It included doctors, patients, admin type persons, and a whole cross section of stakeholders. And we looked at the QEH. In fact, we came up with the theme, Rescue the QEH. And I can tell you, from the whole question of accreditation of the hospital and aspects of the operations there, to getting a cafeteria back in place, which is not operating now.
Correct.
And I can speak to that because I have a niece who is a medical doctor, who at the time was a junior doctor, and before that, an intern at the QEH. And I know at Christmas and different holidays and so on, having to take meals to her. And it went from that to an excellent restaurant, facility, etc. And that is no longer operational. We lost the accreditation. I would have to go into some of these details. And look, we had system. You talk about administration. You had systems of reporting, which ensured that issues at the hospital were flagged and addressed. And I will systematically document these because it's important. I also want to say something about philanthropy. And thanks to the then CEO, Dr. Dexter James, and I will call his name, one of the things that they put in place, because I had to interface with the hospital as foreign minister, who interfaced with the diaspora.
Correct.
People were always eager to send things to the hospital. And Glenn probably would know this. People sometimes sent things without discussing